Start that there. Good deal. And I
And you
will.
post all your videos on YouTube too?
Well, this format is new for me. So my goal. I did my first interview on Sunday with a buddy of mine. He's got a podcast called Tragedy to Triumph, and he does an actual. He works for a rehab, and so my goal is to record it. I'll go record an intro, outro. I'll put the video on YouTube. I'll strip the audio, and then depending on the conversation, I'll put it on one or both lines. But it's going to take a little bit because I wanted to get like 3 or 4 episodes in the can first, and then roll them out. But I might just roll them out on high cost whenever I'm done, or whenever I figure out how to strip the audio and just roll out. I mean, who knows? I'm kind of figuring it out. So
Yeah, I hear you.
so
I'm
cool.
90 episodes in, and it has been quite a journey.
Well, you were one of the. Let's start real quick, and I'll have you introduce yourself, but
Sure.
and then we'll have a convo. So, why don't you? I'll record an intro, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Angela Pugh. I am a national speaker. I'm the host of the nationally ranked Addiction Unlimited podcast. I am an interventionist and a life coach.
Nice, and you are in recovery yourself.
I am in recovery myself. And I guess I should add also, I have another company called Kansas City Recovery based in Kansas City where I have men's sober living houses.
A funny story I was telling my wife about doing a podcast and all this kind of stuff, and she said, you ought to check this girl out, and she sent me your podcast. You were one of the first podcasts that she sent me. I was like, this girl's got some good stuff going on. I like this.
Nice.
So I've heard a number of your podcasts, so
Well, thank you, and tell her thank you.
yeah, and it's you look just like you look on Insta and all your other videos. This is crazy. It's like deja vu.
It's so funny. People say that. And, that was kind of a challenge for me. I'm definitely getting a little bit older. And when I first started on Insta, I was doing a lot of filters and stuff like that. And as my podcast got more popular and people started kind of recognizing me at AA and stuff like that, all of a sudden people were approaching me, and I thought, you know what? I never want to be the person that people come up and they're like, oh my gosh, that doesn't look anything like you online.
Yeah.
So I made a conscious effort to try to be realistic. And, I definitely post videos like on my Facebook, like no makeup with my hair in a bun. Like I
Sure.
just try to be real, because being made up is great, but I'm not made up my whole life,
Right.
know?
You mean you don't wake up like that, Angela? Come on.
Yeah, no.
I actually heard you say that on a podcast, and that's so smart, because there is there's an element of when I talk to people, it's like there's so much more behind the scenes. There's so much more to what you see on Facebook or your Instagram, reel, and it's like, let's show or at least share some of that. So I think that's a very good strategic plan, so you don't have to be made up going to the grocery store all the time.
Yeah,
Very smart.
especially again, like going to meetings. It was like all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, can I really not go to meetings in like jeans? And like, do I have to be made up everywhere I go now?
Yeah, for real. That's awesome. So, one thing, my very first question, I just made a couple notes. How about them Chiefs? I know you're super pumped about that.
Well, I am probably not so.
You're just claiming it because you happen to be from there and live there, and you're really not
I
that
know.
excited.
My city is on fire right now. Everybody is so happy, and I'm super stoked for them. I do live in one of the greatest cities in the country for sure. I always refer to Kansas City as America's best kept secret, and the people here are incredible, and it is such a nice, wonderful place to be, and everybody's so happy right now. They're so excited. For me, honestly, football is the only sport I don't like.
Really?
So
I was like, the human joystick. He went to Texas A&M. Do you remember? Yeah, Dante Hall.
Yeah.
Anyway, 2000 shows a bit of my age, but Yeah.
No, and I didn't live here then either. I spend part-time in Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles for a long time. So I have a whole life out there and friends and a home group and all that stuff. So I'm out there quite a bit as well. But yeah, I'm super stoked for my city. Like everybody is so excited right now and they're having a blast and there were fireworks everywhere the other night and I think at least 90% of the city was drunk and I was just trying to get home and be safe.
Right. Yeah, for real. That's what we like settle into that. There's going to be a lot of people out on the road drinking. You know what? Let's go home early.
Yes. Listen, on game days, I mean, Kansas City is definitely known for the Chiefs fans, right?
Mm.
Like they are not regular fans. Like these people are passionate. And on game days, especially if it's an earlier game, like a noon or even
Yeah.
this was 2 p.m., I think. Like you go to the gas station to get gas, and I swear it's drunken debauchery. Like
Yeah.
everybody's already drunk. At like 10 a.m., people are stumbling around, getting in fights in the parking lot. I'm like, oh Lord, I got to get out of here.
Right. You know what I've experienced is I'm from Texas. I grew up in a place called College Station where Texas A&M is. So just rabid, college football fans. We lived in Houston for a little bit. We moved to Philadelphia. I lived there for 8 years. And then I live in Columbus, Ohio. And, I've done a good amount of travel, but it's funny how, everyone well, let me just be clear. I used to think that our weather was the only weather that was cold at one part of the day and hot in the other part of the day, or our college fans were the craziest or whatever. And I move around the country, and I'm like, it's kind of similar everywhere. And the names don't even change. We lived, I don't know, 20 minutes from Delaware. I lived in Delaware County when I was in Philadelphia. I moved over here. The first thing I noticed was Delaware County. It's right north of Columbus, Ohio. And so you're like Lancaster, Pennsylvania was right outside of Philly, and you got Lancaster right outside of Columbus. You got even the Rio Grande, which is a little bit. I'm like, we're not even creative. We're just repeating the same things over and over again. And
Right.
everybody's weather has some weird stuff going on, with the exception of maybe L.A.
Right. LA is pretty
it's
stable.
how unique we think we are until we get out and get some experience, right?
Yeah.
So a couple things that I'm interested in. Number one is kind of I've heard a little bit of your story, but how did you end up in becoming an interventionist, a coach? The couple of businesses that you have, how did you end up there from, getting sober? Maybe you can share a little bit about your story of going to LA, getting sober, et cetera. But I'm just curious about your businesses and what they look like.
Sure. It was definitely an evolution 100% because of my recovery. The first thing I did, first of all, when I was in my first year of sobriety, when I saw myself really changing for the better and becoming a good human, like it sounds silly, but I never thought I had the ability to be a good person. And when I got sober and I started recognizing these changes in myself and I started seeing myself becoming an upstanding person and start showing up on time. And I was becoming trustworthy and dependable and I wasn't lying anymore. And I didn't really have things to lie about. I just saw this growth in myself and it felt really miraculous. And from that point, I knew that I wanted my whole life to be around recovery. I knew I wanted my life to revolve around recovery. I had no idea what that would look like. When I was in my 20s in Los Angeles, I actually dated a guy who was at that time 16 years sober. And that was in the 90s, late 90s probably. And he was 16 years sober at that point, and he owned a coffee shop right on Sunset Boulevard. And his coffee shop catered to the sober community. So you would go in there and he kind of made this party place for sober people.
Right.
And they were open till 4 a.m. Like they had a jukebox in the back and a pool table, and it was all sober people. So we would hang out there a lot. So I had a little exposure to that life. But honestly, at that time when I dated him, I wasn't even crazy drunk yet. Like I hadn't even
Right.
lost my mind in my drinking yet. But I know that was such a big piece for me. Fast forward 8 years when I had to get sober, that's what I thought I wanted. I was like, oh my gosh, remember his coffee shop?
Mm.
Like that was amazing. And that's always been in the back of my head. But
Were you able to put it together that he was like what being sober meant and what having a sober place was? You did, yeah, dude. Yes, okay, good. So you just were dating a guy. He didn't drink. He got in some
no.
trouble. He's sober 16 years. Yeah, great. And he owned a coffee shop that stays open late. Right.
Right. Like, I mean, I knew, like, I understood the program. Like, I knew getting sober because you lost control, whatever, but I was so young and I had a sneaking suspicion back then that I wondered if I was an alcoholic, but same thing. I didn't really know everything that it meant to be alcoholic. What
Right.
I recognized was I drank in a different way.
Sure.
My attachment to alcohol was very different than my friends,
Sure.
and I recognized those little things early on, but I didn't know everything it meant to be an alcoholic. I didn't understand the loss of control. I didn't understand the brain part of it and how that process changes your brain and creates that craving and all of that stuff. Like I had no idea. I was really proud of him. I thought it was fantastic. I figured it must have been challenging, but that was about the extent of
Well,
it.
here's the question: how did you meet him? Because I'm also wondering. You've got someone 16 years sober. I'm assuming he was a bit older, at least a little bit older, right?
Yes.
Dating a young 20-something bartender. That's probably what you were doing, right? Of
Yes.
like how did that come about?
So he was a DJ at the bar where I worked.
Ah,
And okay, here's something you have to understand about LA too, because even after I got sober, I continued to be a bartender, right? Because it was the only thing I had ever done. And I always joke and say I'm much more feral than domesticated, because I had a very crazy life. Like I never really had a boss. I was not tame
mm,
in any way, shape, or form. So when I got sober, I was not employable,
right,
not because I wasn't smart or anything like that. But I mean, I feel sorry for the person that might try to tell me what to do or tell me to show up at a certain
right,
time. Like I didn't have those abilities. So in LA, it's not uncommon to be sober or get sober and still work in the service industry. It's way
sure,
more common there, which I think that exposure also, like almost everywhere I ever worked in Hollywood or Beverly Hills, I almost always worked with another bartender or a server who was in AA.
yeah,
So again, fast forward all those years when I had to get sober, it didn't seem weird to me to be a sober bartender
right.
because I already had that exposure. For me, like in LA, it's kind of like the natural progression.
Of
You
what
drink
you
a
drink it to
bartending. Yeah,
oblivion,
like
and right,
you drink to oblivion and then you get it together and you
yeah.
get sober and whatever. But yeah, so early on I knew I wanted my life to revolve around recovery. I knew that was my goal.
Hold on,
The first thing,
before you get in that, how
yeah.
was it? Because I waited tables. I waited. I got my real estate license young, and I would do real estate for half the year, and then I would wait tables during half the year. And I remember when I got sober, I was like, "There's no way I could go back to the restaurant." And I didn't know anybody that was sober, number one. So I guess that's one thing that you mentioned, that you knew people that were sober. That was kind of par. At least you knew it existed. How was it when you decided to get sober, to be around alcohol, to be serving food? Because you were the bartender, right? You weren't just a
Yeah.
server. So
Mhm.
what was it like for you in those real early days of going, oh, I'm not drinking now?
Well, I'll tell you definitely a higher power thing for sure, because the bar where I worked, I had worked for a long time. I moved back to Kansas City and I got a job at this little like neighborhood kind of sports bar. And those don't exist so much in LA, right? In LA, I was all nightclubs. I was
Yeah,
all super high volume nightclubs. But those didn't really exist in Kansas City back then when I got here. So
right.
and it felt like kind of a tragedy because I felt like I was so different. You know, when I got that job, I was like, oh my gosh, like these people are not going to like me. You know, like what are we going to talk about
In Kansas City?
In Kansas City, yeah. And it was like a NASCAR bar, right? And here I come, like straight out of Hollywood, you know, looking like one of the Real Housewives or something. And, and I'm walking in the NASCAR bar. But it was one of the greatest experiences of my life, honestly. It really humbled me a lot, which I needed at that time for sure. But these people became my extended family. You know,
Sure.
it was all regulars. It was very much that neighborhood feel. And we spent all of our time together. You know, I
Right.
mean, the people that came in the bar, the people that sat at the bar, the owner of the bar, like we were really, really tight. And when I got sober, my bottom was pretty extravagant, and there was a car accident
I like how you
involved.
call that extravagant. That's yeah.
Extravagant, yes. This was not an average situation
Yeah.
for sure.
Did you get sober? Did you get sober in L.A. or in Kansas City?
Kansas City. Kansas City.
Did you move to Kansas City to get sober, or you moved to Kansas City and happened to get sober?
I really didn't even lose my mind until I got to Kansas City.
Gotcha.
You know, I mean, I definitely drank alcoholically in LA for sure, but I didn't really go off the deep end until I got back to Kansas City. And it sounds crazy, but I had this culture shock. You know, I went to LA really young and I lived my whole 20s. I mean, my first adult decade, I was in Los Angeles. So I was very Los Angeles. And when
Yeah.
I moved back to Kansas City, although I was born and raised here, first of all, I left for a reason. You know what I mean? I left because I never felt like I fit. I just
Sure.
wasn't a typical sort of Midwestern, really happy person. I was just different, you know?
Right.
And so when I came back, I was faced with all that stuff almost tenfold
Right.
because I was very LA. And I was just super uncomfortable. You know, it was such a culture shock and it was a change of everything. You know, in Los Angeles, I lived in the same apartment in Hollywood for 8.5 years. Like I walked everywhere in Hollywood. I lived right off Hollywood Boulevard, you know, like I had a life and I was very comfortable and very happy. I moved back to Kansas City and everything was disrupted. I lived in a very strange suburban place. I mean, it was really nice. You know what I mean? I just was used to the city. I was used to Hollywood. And I actually had more bills and my rent was higher. Like it was crazy.
Why did you go back to Kansas City?
Well, I wanted to leave Los Angeles. I was ready to get out of Los Angeles. You know, LA is a hard city and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And you know, even in the tiniest things, LA will kind of wear you out. You know, like I joke, my friends joke with me now. They're like, Angela, why don't you just move back? You're here all the time anyway. Why don't you just come back full time? And I'm like, you guys don't understand. Like in Kansas City, when I want to go to the grocery store, like I just drive there and I pull in the parking lot and park and I go inside. Like it's just that
imagine
simple.
that.
It's just that simple. And when I come out, like none of my windows are broken. None of my things have been stolen.
Right.
I'm not getting mugged. You know, like I was just ready. I needed to relax.
Yeah.
And so I wanted out of LA. I never thought about coming back to Kansas City. That was never my thing. I wanted to go to San Diego or Santa Barbara. Those were kind of my two spots.
Sure.
My girlfriend from Kansas City had followed me out to LA and she was ready to leave also. And she said, why don't we go to Vegas? And I said, well, because I will die. Because if you put me in a place that I can drink 24 hours a day, I will. And it won't last long. So I was like, no, Vegas is out. And I don't like Vegas on a full-time basis anyway.
Sure.
It's its own strange place. But she goes, well, let's go back to Kansas City. And I literally showed up to her house in Venice with a map because back then we didn't have computers. We had maps. And I showed up. We did have computers actually, but
Did you map quest it with the turns and everything?
I showed up with a map and I unfolded it and I was like, there's a whole country and I'm buying. So
Right.
where do you want to go? Because I had no desire to come back to Kansas City, but it worked out perfectly, right? I got here. This is where I really went off the deep end with my drinking. It was
Mm.
perfect that I was with my family and surrounded by my family and my roots and my best girlfriend from high school, and who also played an integral part in my sobriety my first year
Mm.
and really getting me through that time. So, I mean, as usual, it worked out exactly the way it's supposed to.
Of course it does. I heard you mention the ease of Kansas City and going to the grocery store, and it makes me think of Columbus, because Philadelphia was much like LA. Like, it was work. Like, I remember coming out here for a little bit and then going back, and about 45 minutes out, like, it started getting, the tension started coming. People started getting up on behind you. It started having to start work through traffic, and everything is just work there. And
Yeah.
and here, more Midwest and what I'm actually used to in the South, it's just like, you just go. There's plenty of space. You just go in where you're at. And we laughed because in the busiest area of town, the parking meter's like $1 for like 3 hours.
Yeah, right.
And you're like,
Yeah.
I remember the first time I went to Philadelphia. I went to a networking group in the city. I parked in a parking garage. I was there for maybe 2 hours, and they're like, that'll be $35. I was like, oh, no, I think you got it wrong. I was here for 2 hours. I had to step out of line. I had to call my wife. I didn't have any money. I didn't have enough money. So anyway, it's a lot like work living in those places. So
It is, and that was not so bad in my 20s, but as I was getting older, like I just wanted to relax.
Sure.
I just wanted to relax a bit.
I'm tired. I just want to relax, drink,
Yes.
chill.
And now it's different too, because now when I go to LA, I spend all my time on the West Side, right? Where before I lived in Hollywood, which obviously is a very different vibe, different energy. Now I'm always on the West. I'm always in Malibu and, Santa Monica a little bit, but yeah, that's even a different energy, so it is still more relaxing when I'm there now.
Right. So tell me, before you roll into, I guess, the original question, which I'm very interested in, what was the end like whenever you got sober? You said it was very, what was the word you used? It wasn't glamorous. Extravaganza of getting sober. What was that like?
So for me, I crashed my car at 70 miles an hour and on the freeway, and I hit another car. And there was a moment in that I thought I killed that person. And I mean, thank God I didn't, obviously. All I think about, though, when I think about alcohol, like all I think about is those moments that I was standing on the side of the freeway, right, covered in blood, and thinking that I had to call my mom and tell her I killed somebody. And that's not a great feeling.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, I mean, I have like the greatest mom on the planet. Like, I have the quintessential mom person, loving, kind, nurturing. My mother takes honesty and integrity to a whole new level, and that's who I was raised by. And I adore her. And to have to call her and tell her I killed somebody, I mean, that's all I thought about. And even to this day, we were just talking about this last night in my group coaching. I do a Monday night group coaching, and we were talking about it. And I said, my association with alcohol is so negative and kind of terrifying. Like if somebody tried to offer me a drink, to me, it's like you're holding a gun to my head, because that's what I think about. I think about that moment. When I think of a drink, I think about that moment on the side of the freeway when I was busted and broken and bloody, thinking, how am I going to tell my mom that I just killed somebody?
Sure.
And hear her like literally die on the other end of the phone, right? Like it's so gross. And it's a blessing too.
Something that I always think is important, because trying to think of that person that goes, oh yeah, well, I'm not an alcoholic because I didn't get arrested or I didn't wreck my car or whatever. What were like the signs or the things? I have to assume there was something in the back of your mind going, you knew you were out of control. You knew that you were drinking alcoholic. You knew you probably wanted to stop but couldn't. So what was it like leading up to that? Was that just like the climax of like, okay, this is enough? You know, leading up to it, what was it like for you? Had you even attempted to stop at that point?
Yes and no. I had two different times that I stopped, once for 30 days and once for 60 days. Neither with the intention of quitting forever, right?
Sure.
Both times it was just, I've got to take a break. I've got to take a step back. I think really my last year is when it all came together. Like, I knew that it had control of me. I knew that it was ruining my life. Like, I literally, I could trace every single issue I had in my life. I could trace directly back to my drinking.
Yeah.
Whether it was financial stuff, relationship stuff, my own inner turmoil and self-loathing, all of that. It was all because of my drinking, the person I had become as a result of trying to drink myself to death. So I got a DUI. That was kind of the first thing. And in the process of going through the legal system for that DUI is when all the pieces really started to fall into place, right?
The DUI was for the wreck, or you had a DUI previously?
No, previously.
Gotcha.
Previously. Yeah. This was the beginning of the end.
Sure.
So really all they want you to do when you get a DUI, especially a first DUI, you have to not drink.
Yeah. Follow the rules. It's be fine.
And of course, not drinking was the one thing I couldn't do. So
did you know that?
I showed up.
Did you know?
Did I know I couldn't?
Did you know you could not drink?
No. Yeah. No, and that's what I'm saying. This was when it all started to really fall into place.
Oh, gotcha.
This is when how powerful addiction started to really fall into place, is when I got in the legal system. So I showed up to see my diversion officer, same thing as a probation officer. Yeah. I showed up drunk, I know, right? Not that I was like doing shots on the way to see her or anything, but I was a bartender. So I stayed up all night drinking.
Sure.
And when I went to see her, and I said this to her also, because she had me blow. Of course, I smelled like alcohol. She had me do the breathalyzer, and I was a 0.1. And I go, well, let's be honest, that's not really drunk. Because I said, I probably haven't been under a 0.1 for a decade. Like, I would die probably if I dropped below that. You know what I mean? I go, let's just be honest here. I'm not drunk.
Thinking this conversation is totally normal, right?
Well, there is some conversation about this in the legal system because it is different for a seasoned alcoholic, right? Like, I could have easily passed field sobriety tests at that point. I was not drunk for me because my tolerance was ridiculous. And well, of course, it didn't go over with her. She did not think that I was as smart as I thought I was.
No. Were you aware that when you were on probation that you weren't supposed to drink? Or did you go, well, I'm on probation, so I'm going to cut back. I'm going to keep it, this is keeping it kind of casual, so it's no big deal. Like, I could do a field sobriety right now.
No.
You knew?
No,
did you know you
weren't
supposed to
drink.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew. And they had me on a call-in thing, a color code. They assign you a color, and you have to call a number every night. And if your color is called, you have to show up and do a urine test or whatever. So yeah, I knew I wasn't supposed to be drinking. So I went ahead and showed up drunk a second time.
This is what they say, alcoholics and drug addicts aren't high achievers. This, my friends, is what we call high achieving right here.
Listen, you have to know what you're good at, and you have to just accept, okay? And that's what I was doing.
That's right.
That's what I was doing. I was very dedicated to my craft. I was committed. But so the second time was actually a really pivotal moment for me because I had made it home from the bar, right? I worked that night. I knew I had my appointment with her the next morning. And I didn't drink all night, right? I told everybody I got to see my PO in the morning. I'm not drinking. I got home and all I had to do was go to bed, right? So I have to walk my dog. I was a different dog. I had a Rottweiler back then. I was like, well, I'll just have a beer while I walk the dog. And I took 2 beers while I walked the dog, and I drank those.
Depends on how you're counting.
Yeah, right. So I walked the dog. We get back, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just make some breakfast and I'll watch some TV. Well, next thing I know, it's like 7 a.m. I'm wasted, and it was such a pivotal moment because it's when I recognized really that it had control.
Right.
That was the time because I kept thinking, I was like, I made it through the whole night at work, where you would think being at the bar would be the most challenging place to not drink, right? It never bothered me to work and not drink. I made it through the whole night. All I had to do was go to sleep. But once I had that one drink to walk the dog, I couldn't stop. And that's when it started to sink in. I was like, ooh, wait a minute. Like, I really did not have the ability to stop, regardless of the logic and telling myself, well, you can't sit here and get drunk. Like, you have to see her in the morning. You've already showed up drunk once. But yeah, it was a huge moment because I recognized then that it had way more power than I did.
And how long after this was the wreck?
Okay, so I think the last time I showed up drunk was in October, and my accident was in January, the beginning of January. So it was a couple of months.
On probation for DUI, got into a wreck, drunk. Did you get another DUI?
After I already had my probation revoked for showing up drunk, right? So I had to
go
to jail. I had to go to jail in that time. Like I had to do, like every time I would do something, I had to go back in front of the judge.
This is glamorous right here. This is.
I know. I told you it was an extravaganza.
The Real Housewives. I can see it. Extravaganza. She's high on the hog coming back to Kansas City, showing everybody how it's done.
Lord, it's so embarrassing. So
only alcoholics laugh about these stories, by the way. You ever notice that?
Oh, I know. Oh, yes. God. That's why we have to hang out with each other. Right. Because we think our stories are funny. Like non-addicted people want to have us arrested. There's and rightfully so. I mean, yeah, for sure. they're right.
There's a couple of times where because I'm in and around a lot of social workers, a lot of times, and they had this, it was a kind of a comedy show, but it was kind of poking fun at addiction and mental health. And I'm in the back rolling. I'm thinking this thing is the greatest thing ever. And all the social workers are like, oh, my God, this is crazy. I'm like, we need to get some alcoholics in here and have some fun.
I know. I went to social work school, too. And, yeah, they did not find my jokes funny either.
Definitely not. Sorry. So you got revoked. Were you in jail or were you doing nights and weekends? What were you doing?
So I had to do weekends, and which was super easy. It wasn't, naturally I made sure I got my hair done before I went in.
Did you tell them it was going to cut into your tips? You're like, if you really want me to pay these tips, I can't, these weekends are very valuable.
So I did that. What the greatest thing about all of that was, so my accident happened in January, really early. My accident was actually January 4th. My sober date is January 7th. And I still, because of my probation violations, after my accident, every time I got in trouble, my probation started over from day one. So my probation was a year long, but every time I got in trouble, my year started over. So after my accident in January, my court date came up for the last time I violated my probation, right? Thankfully, I don't think the judge knew at that time that I had another charge in my accident. I had a whole bunch of charges.
Did you get a DUI for that wreck?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was charged with DUI. I was charged with failure to maintain a lane. I had a whole bunch of charges. I had a full-blown trial. The city actually came after me, and they called me a habitual violator.
You were. You were.
Yes. Yeah, that's what. Listen, and all of that, by the way, was in 8 months.
Wow.
Like that was April to January. All of that drama.
Yeah. That's what my last bit was. I got arrested. It was 4 times in 3 years, but I got arrested. 2 years later, I got arrested. A year later, I got arrested. Then 4 months later. So like the progression was like everything kept getting closer and closer, and I still was oblivious to it. Anyway, I get it. So 8 months, you went ultimately down in flames or up in flames, whichever way you're. Sounds up to me. Right? Sounds very glamorous. Up in flames sounds glamorous. And so then, So what's the time where you go, I'm going to get sober? Or they said you got to go to rehab? Or what did that look like?
No, my accident was all it took for me. And really the moment of, overwhelming gratitude, right? When I realized I did not kill that guy. I was actually the only one hurt. I almost died at the scene because, because I was bleeding and I had so much alcohol in my system, my blood wouldn't clot, right?
Little thin?
Yeah, it was a little thin.
Just a little.
I think it was mostly tequila and Rumplemans at that point, so it probably smelled nice.
Yeah.
And, I did not like police back then. I was very unkind. I was a very angry, fighting person. And yes, I talked mad trash. Like I was really unpleasant. And they had to call a female officer to come deal with me, right? Because when you're a girl, male officers don't want to put hands on you because you can falsely accuse them, right? So they call a female officer, and she literally like went and put me in the back seat of her car, like just so they didn't have to hear me.
God,
the unfortunate part of that is that my blood wouldn't clot. So she actually wrote in her report when she went back to check on me 15 to 20 minutes later, I was still bleeding profusely and losing consciousness.
Oh my gosh.
I think at that point they kind of had to shut everything down, rush me to the hospital. And to be honest with you, I only remember tiny pieces of this,
sure.
Right? I was not in my right state of mind and had a head injury to boot, so I just remember bits and pieces. A lot of the stuff I talk about is stuff that I learned at my trial. So.
Whether you found out and you're like, yeah, that's what happened because that's what they said.
Yeah. So, there's nothing like a trial to bring it all back for you.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, there really are just little bits and pieces of things that I remember. They say that an ambulance showed up right after the accident and I refused medical treatment. Like I don't remember that.
Yeah.
And I don't think they realized at the time, obviously, that I was going to continue to bleed until it was dangerous. I don't think anybody recognized that, especially with, I'm sure, the energy that I was putting into screaming profanities at them.
They're like, she's fine. Just put her, let's just get her in jail. Come on.
Yeah, just get her away from us. I think that's all I wanted is to get me away from them.
Dude, don't you feel just compassion and bad for those people that do something crazy and don't remember any of it, and then they're on trial and go to jail for it? They kill someone, they do something. I mean, can you imagine?
This
I guess you can't imagine. You can't
because I lived it. And the really crazy thing was, well, this is what I was going to say about really what did it for me with my accident is, I didn't mind hurting myself. I had hurt myself,
sure.
Plenty of times through the course of the years of drinking in various ways. And what really freaked me out is that it never crossed my mind I could hurt someone else.
Yeah.
And so at my accident, thinking like, oh my gosh, and having that moment when finding out that the guy that I hit was fine, he wasn't hurt at all. They said really probably because he was going freeway speed also. So it's not like I was going 70 miles an hour. Did you roll up on him
going the same direction? Y'all were going the same direction and you hit him. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. At my trial, he said I entered the freeway and accelerated until I hit him.
From the back.
I guess that's probably what happened.
I'd trust him. He probably wasn't drunk.
I definitely trust him.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
I definitely trust him.
So did you go to rehab or did you just start going to meetings? What'd you do?
I started going to meetings. I waited. So I drank one more night. I went home. I got home from the hospital the next morning. Mm-hmm. I didn't get, my face was pretty busted up. My skull was cracked in 2 places. My nose was busted. And I didn't have a busted nose, like where you get black eyes. I had a busted nose where like the entire lower half of my face was swollen. So yeah, it was fantastic.
Wow.
And I had, so I got home on a Wednesday morning and I remember specifically, like I intentionally did not get my pain meds because I wanted to punish myself. And I said to my friend, because he was like, are you sure you don't want to get your medication? Like, you're really going to be hurting later.
Terrible.
Yeah, right. And I said, I said, this is the first time that how ugly I feel on the inside matches how ugly I look on the outside. I said, and I deserve to just lay there and be in pain. And really, I was thinking I was going to kill myself. That was my grand plan. Like, I couldn't figure out how I was going to get through all of this stuff. I couldn't figure out how I was going to get through the embarrassment. You know, my family never knew anything of my drama. I never told them anything. They never knew.
They didn't know about your DWIs or anything.
They didn't know anything. They didn't know any time I had been at the hospital. They didn't.
Jail?
I mean, they knew nothing. No, they knew nothing.
Smokes.
Holy
smokes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just couldn't fathom, like, this situation was a big enough deal that I didn't know how I was going to hide it and get out of it. And so I just thought I was just going to kill myself. I was like, this is it. Like, I can't do anything else, you know? And I was so sad. And by that time, like, my drinking was so dark, you know, there wasn't any fun left. I just hated myself so much, and I hated my life. And I felt so weak because I couldn't handle life. You know, like, I never felt weird about being an alcoholic. Like, a lot of people get hung up on that term, or being an alcoholic. I don't mind being a drunk, right? I'm totally fine with that. But I was humiliated that I couldn't cope with my life. That was embarrassing to me.
Yeah.
You know, that anything that happened in my life, all I could do was run to the bottle. Like, I was like an infant in a lot of ways. I was just incapable, and that embarrassed me. So I was going to kill myself. Luckily, my withdrawal was too bad, and I didn't have the energy. And
so, you know,
yeah,
tomorrow,
maybe I'll get to it later. Who knows? So I laid in my house and I detoxed for 3 days, and some friends of mine and I had purchased concert tickets for that Friday night, right? So I got home on Wednesday morning, it's Wednesday, Thursday, all day Friday. My friends are going, Angela, you've got to get out of the house, dude. We've had these tickets forever. Just come to the show. And I'm thinking, because I just had this extravaganza.
Were you black and blue, though?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't look great.
You're like, it'll be dark. Put your hair over a hat. You'll be fine. Come on. Isn't it great how our friends have great solutions to get us out? Hey, just come drink some more. It'd be fine.
But I've never let like how I looked really stop me from much. Like, I'll still go even now. Like, I'll do facial peels and half my skin's peeling off, and I'll be out shopping. You know, like, I don't really care about that stuff too much. But I thought that they would understand that I wasn't drinking, right? And I really obviously should not have made that assumption. And I agreed to go to the show. I was like, yeah, they're right. We have had these tickets for a long time. I should just go and get out of the house. It'll just be a few hours.
Do you remember who the show was for?
Oh, I can never remember his name. When somebody says it, I always know. It's a really old guy.
Willie Nelson.
I don't know. No.
He had old.
3 names. He had 3 names. He's probably in that same genre as Willie Nelson. I might think of it in a minute. But so we went to the show, and
Robert Earl Keen?
It was no.
3 names. Come on, Nate. I keep it. I'm going, what's the 3? Yeah.
So we were standing in line, and we were about an hour from my house, right? And they drove. I had a second car, but I wasn't driving. I was actually really freaked out about driving for quite a while. And we were about an hour from my house, and we were standing in line to go inside. And my buddy was like, well, I'm going to go get drinks. What do you want? And I just looked at him kind of stunned, because I didn't think they would ever expect that I would be drinking after what I just did, you know? And I go, I'm not drinking. Like, I had the strength to say at one time, I was like, I'm not drinking. And he looked at me and he's like, Angela, I know you. If I get you something, you're going to drink it. So you may as well just get what you want. And in that second, like, all these things flashed through my head. Like, number one, I was an hour from home. I definitely didn't have $100 for a cab ride, right? There was no Uber back in that time. There was nobody that was going to come pick me up. I had already burned all those bridges between being in jail and the hospital, and, you know, nobody was coming to pick me up, especially an hour from home. And I was thinking, like, it's going to be so uncomfortable. It's going to be awful. They're going to drink. I'm not going to drink. They're going to be mad at me. Like, this is going to be freaking terrible. And I'm trapped. And I thought my only solution was to drink. And I knew that it was my last night drinking. Like, I did not question it. I didn't even want to drink then. I would not have drank if I wasn't there, you know. I knew it would be my last night drinking. And I did. and I drank out of control. I woke up the next morning. It was a Saturday morning. And the very first thought I had was, thank God that's over. Just thinking about my drinking life. Like, I knew it was done. I knew I was done. I knew I would never go back. I didn't want to go back. And I think in a lot of ways, probably that concert situation was really good because I really felt like a prisoner. I really felt trapped. And that was just enough to make me angry enough at alcohol that I wanted no part of it, you know? Not to mention that I thought I killed somebody, and, you know, that was alcohol not having my best interest at heart either.
Sure. And so what did you do after that? So you just started going to meetings and working and following the rules on probation?
I did. I waited a week to go to my first meeting because I wanted the swelling in my face to go down.
Be like, hey, you go out anywhere else, but going to an AA meeting looking like shit. You know what? Nah, I don't want them to see me like that.
Well, you know, I had a different perspective on AA. Like, I felt like this was this super exclusive club that not everybody got to be a part of. Like, from day one, I felt like it was quite an honor to get to be a part of it. And really, I mean, I was
Did you get super pumped when they said, Angela, keep coming back. We need you. And you're like, oh my God, they want me in the club. Oh my God.
I'll tell you what happened my first meeting. It was so funny. Really, I waited a week because I was really miserable. You know, like my whole head was busted up and I was very uncomfortable, and I really just laid in bed and did nothing. But I conned my best girlfriend into going to my first meeting with me. And I said to her, I was like, just go, just get me in the door, please. I just need somebody to get me in the door. I was like, you don't have to say anything. Like, I'm not going to say anything, but I've got to get in the door, you know? And we pull up. The first meeting I went to is at one of those mega churches, right? It's like the size of a shopping mall. Like, this place is ginormous. It's my sober date is January, right? I'm in Kansas City. So it's pitch black at 5 p.m. We're driving around. Like, we don't even know where the entrance of the church is, like more or less where you go in for the AA meeting.
Sure, the little door.
Yeah, right. We just saw these people kind of congregating, and I was like, well, let's just go there and, you know, I'll ask somebody. So we park the car, we go walking up. Of course, it's freezing. And we go walking up across the lawn of this church, and there's this old dude standing out in the grass. I swear you, he had to be 70 years old, which back then felt like a lot older than it feels now.
Of course.
Now I'm almost 50. Like, that seemed really old back then.
Right.
But he was like 70 years old. He literally was standing in the middle of the church lawn, like taking a leak. Like, not behind a bush,
gangster,
not around the corner of the building, but literally standing in the church lawn.
Dark. They couldn't see everything.
And I felt so relieved. I was like, oh, thank God these are my people.
Oh, my God.
I did. I was like, oh, I'm definitely in the right place. And it really was just that perfect moment of comedy that we needed that just melted all the anxiety. And I was like, okay, we're good to go. I mean, listen, if I could stand up and pee, I would be doing it too.
Yeah, for real. I was thinking my wife has come a long way from that. You know, there was a time when she was saying, like, I had like 5 years sober when I met her, and she's like, why do you hang out with those people? Why do you degrade yourself by calling yourself an addict and alcoholic and all that? And so it would be like, oh my God, he's peeing in the lawn. And now she's like, oh, there they are. Let's go hang out with them. So we've come a long way. We actually enjoy it now.
Listen, we are the best people. Addicted people are the funniest, smartest, strongest people ever built. That is the truth, because the other people out there could not for a moment deal with what we deal with on a daily basis, having a brain that is on attack at all times, right? Like, managing my brain and giving it enough information to consume and keep it distracted and happy on a daily basis is its own full-time job, you know? And if I don't take care of my little brain and the committee in there, it will immediately start attacking me, right? The general public can't hack it. Like we are by far the strongest people, and what we go through to recover and to make that decision every single day over and over again to be that committed to anything is amazing. Because most people with commitment, it's, they're committed until it gets uncomfortable and then they stop, whether it's, changing their diet or exercising, whatever the change may be. So yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated by addicted people and so proud to be one, honestly.
Well, this is an interesting topic because I have so I've been lucky enough to always be open about my sobriety. So it was a month after my 21st birthday. I've always been in some sort of sales role. I had a boss, but like I was in real estate, and I was never worried about, is Sally going to find out, my boss? And then it was always something that I shared with everybody. And, my podcast called The High Cost of Anonymity, that although I respect anonymity, there is a high cost to our community when your neighbor doesn't know the value that is sitting next to them in case they or someone they know is struggling, that they don't even know you could reach out. And then layer on mental health, people that struggle with mental health, not being able or comfortable to share that. And so I'm always trying to articulate and also hear other people's experience about why it could be detrimental, because I just, I have a tendency to be biased. But I think that someone in recovery or someone that's overcome mental health and addiction it's like their superpower. Like, to know that the steps that we work, the principles that we have, this environment of fellowship and service, and like that's someone I would want working for me. But people are so scared to say it. Like one thing that's been kind of new is I go into schools a lot. And so I'm really open. And one of the social workers had said, well, what if, your second grade teacher gets sober and then they find out and then mom doesn't want her kid in her class anymore? And so now, and that's real, because I go, well, I've never really thought of that. I never had to think about it. And then the question is, where in your recovery should you start to be open? Because I don't think someone with 90 days should be out there going, I'm sober, I'm this, I'm that. A year is kind of debatable. My instinct is kind of around the 2-year mark. But that's just I think it's a superpower. I think everybody should figure out, what does that look like for them, how they share it, the way they share it. Like, let's figure out what you're comfortable with, and let's just inch your way down that path of being open about your recovery. And it just made me think about, that's like their superpower. That's people in recovery superpower. And the more people that I can encourage to share, help them share it in a way that's comfortable, we're going to help our community that way. As opposed, because the other thing is, when you don't share it, you're perpetuating the stigma. Right?
Totally. You're perpetuating the stigma of 12-step too. People are weirded out about going to 12-step meetings because it's so shrouded in secrecy, and it's like I always say to people, I'm like, listen, we are the same fools you were drunk in the bar with. We just sit in a different room now. Yeah. We're the same people that are at your company picnic or Christmas party. Like, we're the same people. Yeah. We just hang out in a different spot now. We drink a lot of coffee. That's all.
And eat a lot of sugar. We're just people. But whatever.
And eat a lot of sugar. Right. That's another show.
Well, I think that's exactly. I think that's because that's that's something where, and I just think the conversations happen one-on-one. That's what I kind of come down to is, the more that I am open and share and talk and open those conversations. I mean, I drop it often, like, oh, I've been in recovery a long time, blah, 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 because I just want to open that door. And some people take the bait and some people don't. But most importantly, I want the people that are in recovery in recovery, curious about recovery, or has a family member, I want them to open a conversation with me so I can see how can we help this person. But yet, our friends and family or whatever will get so crazy, be rolling on the ground doing all kind of stupid stuff, and then they go, oh, get sober. I'm not. If they get sober, they don't want to tell anybody. They don't. I'm like, well, everybody
Right.
knows you were drunk anyway. So
Right.
what's the big deal? But anyway, it's a good question. What is your sense, since you're coaching a lot of people, you're around a lot of people new in recovery, do you have kind of a general feel for when it's okay to maybe start sharing professionally or openly? Do you encourage people to do that? What time, how much time do you think they should have to do it? What's your view on that?
Well, I think it is a deeply personal decision, honestly. And I used to, my first few years, I really didn't understand why anyone wouldn't want to share their experience, because I've always had just this really positive attitude about recovery and being an alcoholic and AA. Like, I've always just thought it was really pretty cool. I do believe it's my superpower, and I felt that way from day one. So
Right.
I really didn't get why anybody would want to keep it to themselves. And I never had a moment of anonymity. I mean, I went to a noon meeting every day, and I had to be at work at the bar at 5, and I would show up at 5 and tell everybody what I learned at AA that day. I was so excited,
Right.
I'm sure they loved it.
Right.
But along the way, you definitely hear of situations where it does make you understand how everybody's situation is different. And there are professional situations that you definitely wouldn't want to share. I mean, what if you had a boss, your direct superior, who had a really awful experience with an alcoholic and had trauma around that? Do you want to be the person going, hey, I'm an alcoholic?
Yeah.
Like, there are reasons to have discretion. And I get that. There's a guy in my home group that tells a story about his kids when they were young. One of their friends' parents found out that he was in AA, and they didn't want their kids to play together anymore.
Yeah.
Like that stuff is real.
It's real talk.
For me, it's real. Yeah. And for me, one of the reasons I love being so open about it is because I'm just a regular person. There's nothing outstanding about me. There's nothing super weird about me either. I'm just a regular person living life like everybody else is. And I happen to be an alcoholic.
Sure.
So I think I want to normalize it, right? It's weird to me that we've normalized drunken stupidity and people vomiting on each other like that's normal.
Yeah.
Right. But not drinking is weird.
Yeah.
So that's part of my thing, is just to normalize it. And I think the more, especially celebrities, the more celebrities that come out and share their story, where we can see that addiction doesn't discriminate. It will take whoever it wants. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to be homeless, living under the bridge. Like, we're everywhere, recovering people and alcoholics and addicts are everywhere. So I think that's important. But I think if you are hiding it, that's a whole other issue, because it will make you feel bad about yourself, right? Most of us in our active addiction, we have a little bit of a double life in certain ways. We're either hiding what we're doing from our spouse or our families or work. We all have some sort of duality as a result of our addiction. And when you're trying to recover, you can't have secrets, right?
Yeah.
Addiction and alcoholism can only thrive if you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
So if you're keeping this major secret and you're trying to hide it from everybody, it's no different than keeping the secret of drinking or using drugs. And addiction will thrive on that. So I think there's a difference between having some privacy and hiding from who you are. And I think that's the distinction. I don't know that any length of time or length of sobriety necessarily makes a difference. I knew absolutely for sure that I would never drink again. There was no question in my mind from the minute I said I was done, I was done.
Really?
I knew I would not drink again. Yeah.
Wow.
I've never wanted to drink. I do not miss my old life. I just won't drink again. It just isn't, it's so gross, and I don't want any part of it. Now, I can say that comfortably because I'm also extremely diligent about working on my recovery and making sure it's not that I'm not susceptible to relapse. I'm just as susceptible as anybody else, but I will always be on top of my game to the best of my ability to make sure addiction does not come back into my life.
Yeah. I guess I haven't really it's really more what I fantasize or would fantasize about or catch myself fantasizing about is the feeling of no responsibility, like the lift. And I did more drugs. I mean, alcohol was always there, but I always kind of fantasize about the lifting of like the sense of responsibility. It's not the substance; it's what the substance,
the euphoria it brings.
That's right.
Yeah.
But then I think you bring up some good points, because I do think that there's some people out there that are professional, that are being private, and I think that, I can't say that if I was in their shoes, I can't say that I wouldn't do it any different. I just think with all the talk about normalizing, which is part of the flag that I wave, which is at what point are you perpetuating, even let's call it private, but it'd be like, yo, you've been sober 10 years. Don't you think it's time that people that you work with knew that you don't just not drink, you're actually in recovery, you help a lot of people, you value, like you're a resource in your organization, because by not saying it, you're basically saying, whether it's I'm embarrassed, I'm scared of repercussions, which is also perpetuating the lie or the stigma. And I also think oftentimes it's never as extreme as you think it's going to be. In other words, the thing that we fear the most, that stuff probably won't even happen. So I'm always finding myself just pushing up against them, asking those questions, because it is an individual decision. And just because I'm cool with it and you're cool with it doesn't mean they need to be cool with it. But if I can kind of kick them, move their line just a little bit, I think that it's more valuable to our community if they move their line a little bit. That's all.
Well, I think you can get people there in different ways too. I was just having this conversation. I've got a new client. I do a pretty intensive, personalized 6-week program with people. Certainly in early sobriety is usually who's hiring me to really get stable in early sobriety. But I was talking to a new client today, and they were worried about some things, 3 or 4 months down the road. And I said, listen, here's the deal. You're in this space right now, and you're working with the information that you have to work with. I said, but as you progress, you don't know how you're going to evolve and what your feelings are going to be. And I think when you get pretty comfortable in your sobriety, it doesn't feel so important to keep it a secret anymore, right? I think there's a certain level of comfortability you have to have within yourself to be comfortable sharing it and to not fear repercussions. I had somebody with a business loan one time many years ago. I was going for a business loan, and the guy said to me straight up, he's like, how could we trust you? You're an alcoholic. And I was like, and I was stunned,
Yeah.
And I kind of laughed, and I was like, well, God, I go, now that you mention it, I don't know if I can trust you either. Because I don't know what your issue is, and that's more scary to me, because everybody's got something. Everybody's got issues, right? Alcoholism just happens to be mine. But at least I have a program, right? I've got somewhere to go where I can learn to be good and be better and grow up and make better choices and be well-adjusted. Like, at least I have teachers all over the world. Like, what are you going to do?
Right. Did you get the loan, or did you say kick rocks, sucker?
No, kick rocks.
Kick rocks. Kick rocks. What does it look like? So when someone hires you as a coach, what does that look like? Do they reach out to you and say, I'm thinking about getting sober, I am sober, I've attempted multiple times, and I need extra help? What does that look like for you?
Usually I would say I've attempted multiple times and I need help. I'm really serious now. I've got to do something. This has to stop. But yeah, it's typically in those pretty early stages of sobriety. A lot of times after a relapse, everybody's a little bit different, but there are different ways to work with me too. Like not everybody is doing a 6-week intensive program. That's just a really good accountability. I think I tend to get more people doing that don't want to go to meetings yet. And sometimes they want to go by the time, we're getting into it and hearing my thoughts on it and, that I love it there and whatever. Sometimes they will end up going, but it's just to have that accountability and support and and to have it kind of on your own time in the privacy of your home, so you can have that discretion when it's necessary.
Sure. Do you find that when someone is paying money, they listen more?
Well, listen, this has been proven 1,000 times. Okay. So, and it's funny because my core purpose is to be of service,
Sure.
right? I just want to help people. And it is amazing how often I have given things away. Even my 6-week program is $2,000. Like I have given that away to people and they don't show up. Right. But this is a life coaching thing too, right? Because I work with people that don't have addiction issues too.
Sure.
I do a lot of high performance coaching for high achieving people, right? That's totally what I am, type A entrepreneur. So I work a lot in that realm too. But when you really want something and you really are ready for it, you will figure out a way to pay for it.
100%.
And in life coaching, they teach you not to chase clients. Because if you're chasing clients, you're getting clients that aren't really ready to be coached. And what ends up happening is it turns into drama, right? Because then you chase them down to work with you, and then they think you're going to be the magic pill, but you're not the magic pill because they're not ready to do the work. And then they're just mad at you.
Yeah.
And everybody's mad. So it is always the truth that when somebody is at a place that they are willing to invest in themselves and invest big, they definitely just have more skin in the game. And that level of commitment is directly correlated to that level of investment.
I definitely agree and see that because, like I said, my wife's been a coach for a long time, and I've moved a lot in my recovery as far as my opinions. Like when I first got sober, I mean, I went to a meeting every day for 4 or 5 years. I was,
me too. Yeah.
One book, one fellowship, one sponsor this way, and it was my wife. I actually got clean in Narcotics Anonymous. My wife started going to Al-Anon, and I wanted something that was a little bit more familiar with her, that we could do something together. I'd graduated college. We were looking to get married. And so I started going to AA, and so I did that for a number of years, and then getting into the field because I work for a mental health and addiction hospital. This is my first time in the field, and so having to address replacement therapies for drug addiction,
right.
Going to multiple fellowships. I actually been going to ACA, if you know what that is, which is craziness. Yeah. I've hired a therapist for the first time ever. So, and I feel like a lot of the progression of my profession is going to be somewhere along the lines of what I perceive as you doing. You've got the podcast, you've got intervention, you've got a sober house, and I don't know what variation of it. It's very, very early days, but if you asked me in the first 5 years, I would have been like, why would you hire a coach? You got to keep them separate. You got a sponsor for your recovery and you got a coach for your life, right? And now I'm like, especially with this new variation or access to sobriety, when people are getting sober that don't even go to 12-step, mind blowing. I'm going, people do that? That's crazy. But like, who the hell am I to say? Like, where on the spectrum does someone need to be, or maybe they never go to meetings ever, but they get over a bit of a hurdle. You coach them for, short-term, long-term, whatever, and just a small portion is around drug and alcohol addiction. And who am I to say they don't need that? And who am I to say they don't need that from me or you or anybody else, right? So that's an interesting it's just an interesting perspective, service. I think it's valuable. I think people need it. Now, here's the other question. I'm so biased towards 12-step that whatever I need to do to get them, it's like the wrapping paper versus the present. Whatever wrapping paper I need to present to them, I'm down with. And then I give them the present, which is like, if you really want to do this, this is where we hang out, kind of a deal. Do you find yourself kind of trying to inch them towards a fellowship, or or do they come up with it themselves? Do you, I don't know, what do you kind of gently shove them that way, or find yourself pushing them that way if they qualify?
I think that it ends up that way, not intentionally, but because obviously 12-step is my experience. Yeah. So I talk about that very openly. Yeah. And again, having a really positive outlook on those rooms naturally, I think, makes it more attractive to people. Yeah. And I did an episode of my podcast called The Absolute Truth About AA. Mm-hmm. And I just break down because every objection, like every person that has objections to 12 steps, everybody says the same stuff, right? There's just a handful of things. I've been doing this work for 12 years. Everybody just repeats hits. The same things, right? So I did a podcast and I just broke it down, and it's one of my most popular episodes still to this day. Yeah. It gets referenced a lot. Like, I have a private Facebook group and people talk about it a lot in there. And I get pretty regularly, people will say that they went to a meeting just because of the way I talked about it. Yeah. But I will encourage somebody to be open-minded. Yeah. But I don't care if you really don't want to go. To be honest with you, if you really don't like AA and you really don't want to go, I don't want you there, because that's a sacred space for me. And if you want to go in and sit down and start judging everybody in the room, I'd just prefer you not go. Yeah. Like, that's my outlook. But I always say a program. I don't care if it's AA, Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Refuge Recovery. I don't care what you do. I think there is an incredible support that comes with programs, right? Yeah. When you are trying to rebuild your life and everybody you know is drunk and you need connection, you need love, you need acceptance, you need friends, well, go to a damn meeting, because that's where we are. Like I always say, it's like AA just gave me the cheat sheet. Like, they did all the homework and they did all the hard work and putting it together and building it. All I have to do is walk in the door and sit down and shut up. Usually that's my best advice.
For real.
But
and I do.
But yeah, I don't intentionally nudge anybody. I just think it turns out that way because I love it there,
I think it's probably as we're talking about it, you attract, whether it's professionally or personally, you attract what you are. You attract people that like your perspective. You attract people that resonate with what you have to say. And so I think it's probably only natural. I still am. There's a couple of other people that I listen to that are on the interview list to go, so how did you do this without going to meetings? And they have their story and they help a lot of people and it's important for them to hear. I just go, I can't fathom not having a place to be no matter where I'm at in the world. I mean, I've been to meetings all over the world, literally. I went on a study abroad program in South America. My first year, I went to college late, but I was down there for 5 months. I would go to Narcotics Anonymous meetings in Spanish. I didn't know what the hell they were saying, but I had a place to go. I'm not sure. Like, if I'm relying on a doctor or a counselor or, God forbid, a script, how am I going to get access to it? Well, you just don't go to South America, maybe. I don't know. But just the value that I've gotten from that
we have a built-in family. We have a built-in family everywhere we go. There's a lot of value in that for sure. But my thing is, I want people to get some kind of help. Yeah. Regardless of their thoughts and feelings about programs, right? I just want you to do something rather than doing nothing. Yeah. And you can still have that same level of commitment to your personal development, not sitting in the rooms of AA. 100%. You really can. Like, the 12 steps, they didn't reinvent the wheel, like, it's a pretty basic process. I'm a super nerd. So if you've ever read any of the philosophers from way back, they talk about exactly the same steps. exactly the same
Community,
philosophies as
mentor,
steps. But even, I mean,
principles, etc.
purging principles, right? Like
Yeah,
your fourth step, inventory. Like like this stuff is from the beginning of time. AA didn't invent it. And it's also a similar process, even in life coaching, like all the things that we talk about in the exercises we do, it's all the
right.
same stuff.
Of course.
So you really can. I think it's a little more challenging and probably not as fun as going to meetings,
Definitely not as
right?
fun. We're not
Because
biased at all, but
definitely
it's
not as
definitely not as
fun,
fun.
right? Well, I mean, I get to walk in and be surrounded by people just like me and have
Sure.
these kind of conversations no matter where I am. Like that's fun.
Yeah.
And, for people that don't want to explore that, I do feel kind of bad for them because it's not they can't do it. You can absolutely do it, but you have to have such a level of commitment to yourself and staying on top of your game. And even people that work with me privately that don't want to go to meetings, the first thing we do is create accountability, right?
Yeah.
The very first thing we do is get some people plugged into their life, right? And we orchestrate how we're going to have these conversations and what we're going to say and all that stuff. So they have accountability because you have to. You have to have people that have an expectation that you're not going to drink because you said you're not going to drink.
Sure.
You can't just keep that in your head because you're going to drink.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think too, just for me personally, like I've got some moving to do, meaning I've drawn some hard lines in the sand over the years and I need to soften those lines and learn new stuff. And I'm actually, the cool thing is I'm actually genuinely curious and interested. Because as someone that just likes talking about the topic, the more well-versed I could be when someone reaches out for help because I've set it up that way. I have a number of tools to be able to direct them. And then also, I have to let them go through what they need to go through to get the answers they need to get. In other words, if I'm banging them over the head with some 12-step club and I'm running them off,
Right.
I've just hurt them, not helped them. So if they go, I'm going to go try this, we'll be like, cool, go try it. And then, some end up back and go, okay, maybe those meetings aren't so bad, but who am I to say what they need? I don't know.
I always remind myself that my only job is to love and support you and treat you with respect. It is not my job to judge you and what you think you should do or shouldn't do. It's not my job to judge anyone that doesn't want to go to AA. Like that's just not my job in life, right? My job, especially as your coach or even as a friend, as a sister, as a daughter, right? My only job is to be loving and kind and supportive and make sure that I'm being true to who I am. I don't want to be judging people. Like we'll all get there. We'll be okay.
Sure.
We'll figure it out. You have to be committed to figuring it out, whatever that looks like.
And to be fair, there's a lot more out there than what was around it when I got sober. I mean,
no question.
When you got sober, I mean, the access, the information, the books, the support, the access that you can get online is just, it's bonkers. When I got sober,
amazing.
They said,
you
got 6 weeks. You better go to meetings because if not, you're screwed. I mean, that's basically what they told me. So, that's, there's a lot more resources out there than what was, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so, I think that's only helpful and beneficial. Tell me about your intervention part of your business.
Sure. It's interesting. Intervention is, oh gosh. So I was 2 years sober. I came home one night and the TV show Intervention came on. And I felt like the television was drawing me in. Like I was on the edge of my couch. I was watching it and I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I'm meant to do. And so my whole focus kind of shifted. I had already been coaching for a little while at that point, probably about a year. And I knew that those coaching skills would be really handy in intervention, right? To me, it made sense. It kind of
100%.
would go together. So
just a little bit more complicated with the family involved and the group and all that kind of stuff.
For
but
sure.
You're ready if you're that interested.
But listen, you're really coaching the family.
100%.
Totally. It's all coaching. My life coach skills are by far my most valuable tools ever.
What did you do a coaching program
I
where
did.
you
I
got
went
certified?
to Certified Coaches Federation many, many years ago. I
Certified
mean, it
coach.
was probably, I got sober in 2006. So it was probably 2007 when I
Yeah,
went and did that. And then I've just trained on my own. Like that is, I was always kind of obsessed with life coaching anyway.
sure.
Like I followed Tony Robbins from the time I was really young. I was always into self improvement, probably because I'm a control freak, and that helps you feel like you have more control in who you are and what your life looks like, right? I love that. So, um, studying people has always been my thing,
Yeah,
and how the mind works, and how especially communication and words people use and how people receive words. Like that's always been my jam since I was super young.
sure.
So the intervention show came on and my whole focus shifted. Like, what do I have to do to be an interventionist? Now, mind you, I was in Kansas City where, Kansas City is still virtually untouched by the treatment industry
100%.
still today. It is a nice little pocket of the world that, doesn't have all the nonsense. And the flip side of that is when you're an addiction professional, you don't have anything, So I don't have a lot of resources. There aren't a ton of people in my industry that I can have luncheons with, and there just isn't a big industry here. So I really had to travel, right, to invest in myself to become an interventionist. I had to go out of state. I had to, go to trainings and do all those kind of things. And then for me, I just started reaching out to other interventionists and saying, teach me, like I feel like I'll be really good at this. I know I communicate with people well. I connect with people really well.
Mm,
And I knew I could be impactful, but it's very strange when you're walking in to do your first intervention, because that so much of an intervention is completely it's managing the unexpected. Like you have
sure.
no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea how it's going to go. You don't know who even in your intervention party might fall apart. You don't know. I mean, you just don't know. You never know what's going to
How
happen.
did they find you? How, like, or in the early days, they go, Angela, we need your help. Come to St.
So
Louis.
in the early days, I went to a lot of conferences. There are some big addiction treatment conferences all across the country, and I did those a lot, right? To be in front of people, to be meeting people in treatment centers, to have my name out there.
Mm,
And for the majority of my career, especially many years ago, 8, 9 years ago, intervention was really in its heyday. And I was doing a lot of interventions. I mean, I was traveling 20 days a month. It was pretty crazy.
jeez.
And all my business was out all over the country. I didn't do anything in Kansas City. I've never,
And
even though I
treatment
live in
centers were
Kansas
calling you?
City, treatment centers and people just pass your name around, right? I mean, when you're sitting in AA meetings all over the place, people know
Mm,
who you are. They find out what you do. They have your card. They see your website. Yeah, all word of mouth for me. So even though I've lived in Kansas City, my business has never been Kansas City based.
yeah,
This is just my home
that's where you
base,
live, yeah.
It wasn't until I opened Kansas City Recovery with the sober living houses that I actually had a business that was just for Kansas City.
Mm,
But anyway, I've always just traveled and did interventions all over the place. And typically when I do an intervention, I send people to treatment far away. Not every time, but more often than not, we'll say.
sure.
So I'm flying to the city, doing the intervention, and then flying them to treatment from there, and then back to Kansas City or LA. I did that for a long, long time. What's interesting now is everybody knows me as a podcast host, right? And from the podcast, they typically know I'm a coach. And sometimes they pick up that I'm an interventionist. Like I don't talk about it a ton, but it is still definitely a part of my work. But people, I think they don't understand how much training and education goes into being really good at those things.
Sure.
Like intervention itself it's a science. It really is. It's 100% strategy. You've got to be really on top of your game. You've got to be able to think very quickly. You have to be able to manage a lot of people and personalities all at the same time and maintain the room.
Mm,
It's incredible. And in the course of all of that, I went to school. I didn't go to college till later either. I was 37 before I went to college. And I went to social work school. I studied neuropsychology. I did a specialized addiction counseling program. I have all of this education, and it's funny. Now I'm a podcast host, and everybody just thinks that I'm doing a podcast, and I'm like,
Sure.
well, yeah, I'm doing a podcast, but at the same time,
Well,
I've put in, over a decade of my life, and probably about $100,000 into my experience and my education and my training to be on top of my game and to provide the best service I could possibly provide.
sure. Do you
The podcast just came from that.
well, do you find that the podcast is doing what you wanted to do, which is helping you tell a story and getting you business, people reaching out to you going, you sound like you know what you're doing. Can you help me? Is it working?
Yeah, with coaching for sure. I didn't have any plan when I started my podcast. I just wanted to share stories.
Sure.
I never thought about it becoming a business. I never thought about marketing. Like, I didn't think about any of that stuff. I just wanted to tell recovery stories so people would understand they're not alone. And also so people would understand that our details don't always match, right? Like you don't have to drink the way I drank to be an alcoholic. You don't have to crash and almost kill somebody to consider yourself an alcoholic, right? Everybody's details are a little bit different. And I just wanted to share stories. That was it. And it just kind of took off on its own. And as you know, also, running a podcast is not a simple or inexpensive endeavor either. There's a lot of, as you start to get bigger and start managing it, there are a lot of moving pieces and they all cost money. So I think at some point, if you're really going to keep it going and you want to reach people, you have to figure out how to monetize on some level, or it's not sustainable,
Yeah. No, I actually loved it. I listen, I've always been a consumer of podcasts. I've talked about doing podcasts, but I did, when I lived in Philadelphia, I was a realtor for 10 years. I sold some other things for a couple of years. I was in Philadelphia, sold flooring, and we came out and visited Columbus on a whim. We didn't even know where Columbus was. We came out to the Country Living Fair. Do you know what the Country Living magazine is? You ever seen that? It's like a decoration.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
We come out here. We were here for 5 days. We go home to Philadelphia, put our house on the market, move 3 months later, and I totally changed jobs. We got jobs when we got here. And so I'm like, I'm tired of this crap of wanting to go into, drug and alcohol addiction treatment. I thought I'd work for a treatment center, but I thought you had to be a counselor. Thought you had to be a therapist. I didn't know anything else, so I do more outreach. But yeah, we got here, and my creativity has just exploded because I'm finally in an industry that I actually enjoy. I could, this is not work to me. What I go out and do on a regular is not work. And so, the other thing about with starting the podcast, I didn't get a microphone. This is brand new for these interviews. I just been talking into my cell phone, and I'm like 58 episodes in. I'm like, what is going on here? I think I need to start maybe figuring out what I'm doing here, because
upgrade,
do some stuff, which is
I did
cool.
the same thing. I started. Probably my first. I don't even know. I had $20 microphones.
Yeah.
That's what I used. I had $20 microphones. I found somebody online who, was talking about microphones, and he was like, listen, these Behringer mics, they're $20. They've been great. And I was getting all these compliments on my audio quality, right?
Dude,
I knew
exactly
it was really important. Hilarious. Yeah. So, and I just upgraded mine. We have the same microphone.
Do we?
And I just upgraded. Yeah. I just upgraded mine maybe 6 months ago.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk. Have you ever watched Gary V stuff?
One of my favorites.
Yeah, and that was the, one of his biggest things is who cares, just do. And so that's exactly, and that's what the High Cost podcast started out. And I'm just like, I cannot believe how many episodes I'm in. And now I'm going, well, I want to start interviewing people. So now I'm just asking people and, figuring it out as I go. And I freaking love it. It's the funnest, it's just fun having these conversations. I love it. And
it is. It's probably one of the things in my career that I'm the most proud of too, honestly. And I have that same philosophy. I thought about doing a podcast for a couple of years, and I just had some fear. I didn't really know how it worked. And one of my friends, Wade Bergquist, he started a podcast and he interviewed me for his. And that kind of got me a little bit closer because I was like, oh, now I can ask him questions, you know? Yeah. And I finally just decided to do it because you can't get better at something until you're doing it.
Yeah.
So I thought, of course, it's not going to be perfect. Of course, it's not going to be great right off the bat. You know what I mean? But I have to start doing it to even see how it should get better. You know?
For sure. For sure. What, so we talked about coaching. We talked about intervention. How did you start your sober house or decide you wanted to do that?
So really as a result of interventions more than anything.
What's it called, by the way?
Kansas City Recovery. And I was doing all these interventions. I had a couple of years that I was doing all these interventions in Kansas City, which was really odd for my career because, again, the majority of my intervention career had always been all over the country. And all of a sudden I had these couple of years that I was just getting a ton of work in KC. And what was happening is all these parents were calling me, you know, we get the people to treatment, you know, it's either parents or spouses usually. And we'd get their person to treatment and they'd be coming home and the parents would be calling me going, okay, Angela, he's coming home. Where's he going to live? And again, you're talking about a city that doesn't have a ton of resources. So we have sober living houses that are part of the Oxford organization. Oxford houses are all over the country.
Like the Oxford group?
Is. Yeah,
No.
the Oxford.
No.
Yeah, Oxford. Yeah, not Oxford group like the old AA group.
Yeah, okay. I'm going, what?
But I would assume that's why they're called Oxford.
Yeah, quite possible, yeah.
So they're just a national nonprofit. If you had a rental house, you could become a part of the Oxford organization and have a sober living, and they have their own rules and bylaws and that kind of thing. Well, of course, again, I'm much more feral than domesticated, so I didn't want to follow anybody else's rules. And I knew what I wanted my sober living to be like. I knew the energy I wanted to create. I knew the culture I wanted to create. And I just, you know, all my families were just going, where are they going to live? And we don't have any resources here. We don't have any options here. So I decided I wanted to do nice upscale sober living. And we're not upscale like luxury, you know, mansions in Malibu. Like I'm not rocking that kind of upscale.
But it's clean.
But it's very clean. We have
together.
very nice houses. My guys are definitely a little spoiled. And at the same time, they are held to a higher standard of cleanliness and conduct and all of those things. And they really, it's beautiful to watch. Like they take care of those houses so well. And part of that for me too is that I wanted them, I don't want you to live in some old house that a bunch of dudes have destroyed over the years and nobody cares enough to buy new furniture or wipe down the countertops. You know what I'm saying? Like I wanted an environment where people could be proud to come home and feel comfortable and feel good inviting their moms over. You know, I was telling them, I'm like, we're very mom friendly and dad friendly. Dads come over and hang out and watch the games, you know? So
how many houses do you have?
I just wanted to do it my way. I have 2 houses.
2 houses. How many guys per house?
10 in one, 7 in the other.
And you say you had a feel, an idea in a, I guess, culture environment that you wanted to create. What did that look like, or does it look like?
So it dawned on me several years ago in my early sobriety, I had a crew of people. And my crew, there were probably really about 6 or 8 of us of the really core crew, and we did everything together. And fast forward more than a decade, not a single person from my original crew has ever relapsed.
I think I heard you say that on somewhere.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, right? That is such an abnormal situation. So I just thought about what our lives were like in our early recovery. Like what were the things that we were doing? Because I believe what we did, it completely accidentally, we didn't know we were doing it, but what we did inadvertently is we built this really powerful foundation because we were having so much fun and we did everything together. We went to movies together. We went to meetings together. We did service work together. We watched television shows at each other's houses every week. We cooked out together. I mean, we were tight. And we were so busy having fun and enjoying our new sober lives that we never had the opportunity to miss our old life.
Sure.
And so I just thought about what were all those components that I felt like made us so strong as individuals in our sobriety. And that's how I wanted my house to be. I wanted it to have a culture of fellowship. I want everybody to know each other. I don't want a home where people come home, go in their rooms and close the door and nobody knows each other, right? I want fellowship. I want it to be fun. So we do family style dinner. We do cookouts. We do cookouts and invite everybody's families over. Everybody's required to do service work. And we typically do that as a group. And I create a few of those opportunities a month. It is a fellowship, you know, and it is very firmly based in the principles of recovery.
And I'm assuming they go to meetings. I'm assuming they have to have jobs. I'm assuming they do UAs and all that fun stuff and have like responsibilities.
All that fun stuff. Yeah.
And a lot of what you're talking about does not ring as maybe I'm putting extreme on there, but as an introvert, you claim to be an introvert, but all this fellowship and friends and, podcasting and stuff doesn't seem so introverted. Or what you want to create doesn't seem so introverted. Maybe that's why you want to create that close friends, do everything together. I don't know. What's that about?
Well, I love fellowship in small numbers.
I guess, yeah. Touche.
So, yeah, at sober living, if I'm at the bigger house where there's 10 guys, that doesn't bother me so much. Sometimes it will, if there are some new people that I don't know so much, but at that point, really, you're purpose driven, right? Because it's not about me.
Of course.
It's really about that other person and making sure they're okay and making sure they're comfortable and they have what they need. And really, that's what I teach my house leaders as well, that our sole responsibility, especially when a new person is coming in, our sole responsibility is to welcome them with open arms and really teach them how we do things and the importance of why we do the things we do.
Sure.
And I stress a lot of that before anybody comes into my house. They know exactly what we're about. They know how we function. They know I'm around a lot, so they can't get away with much. But it's a lot of fun.
I'm assuming they're all relatively local within a couple hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what do you think some of the biggest challenges are in the state of our addiction treatment options, and I'm including the medical system, the judicial system, the insurance system? What are some of the biggest challenges? Because on one hand, there is a lot of options. I mean, they don't speak well together and they don't really work well together, but there's a lot of options. There's a lot of information. But, we need more. I look at a lot of things very skeptically. But where do you think we could do better, or where are some of the challenges with the healthcare system as it is now and how they're treating addiction and mental health as a whole, I guess?
Oh, this is such a tough question. I'll tell you the first thing I think is a huge problem is there is not enough emphasis on really treating the underlying core issues behind addiction, right? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean mental health. We all, as addicted people, we all have some level of anxiety, depression, ADD, because it's the same area of the brain, right? So if we have addiction, our wiring is off and we're going to have some of the other ones too. But the truth is, the truly underlying thing is a lack of self-confidence, integrity, belief in ourselves. And I wish we had more focus on that, right? Especially as addiction gets younger and we're seeing more failure to launch stuff. And failure to launch to me is a tragedy. And
What do you mean by
it's
that?
like, well, what I mean is, I think that parents get so consumed with wanting their children to have a good life and have it better than they had it and all those kind of things. What they do is they cripple their children.
They make their
It's like
life too easy.
they enable them to a point that there's no way they can launch, right? If you do everything for your child and you rescue them from every uncomfortable situation and you pay for the speeding ticket and you call and make the doctor appointments and you pay the cell phone bill and the car insurance and you buy them the first car, well, how the heck do you think they're going to launch? They don't have any practice. You know, like you never made them work on those skills. So no, they're not going to launch successfully, certainly first attempt. So I think to me, that is one of, I think the things that is lacking the greatest in our treatment system is really challenging us as addicts to get through uncomfortable situations. Like, I think it's great to teach all the book stuff, but I'm a nerd. I love that stuff anyway. Like, I want to know about the brain and all that good stuff. But where's the stuff about integrity? Where's the stuff about, you know what, this is going to be uncomfortable and it's time for us to pull our big girl and big boy panties on and face some stuff, you know, like you have to have challenges and you have to overcome challenges. You have to be able to troubleshoot your life, you know, and I feel like we just don't focus on any of that stuff.
Sure. What about
That was not the answer you were expecting,
No,
huh?
it's very good. It's very good. What about when we think in terms of healthcare, that when someone goes to the doctor, to the treatment center, and they say, I want help, and, you know, well, let me just preface it with, because I work for a hospital, it's a mental health and addiction hospital where people go to, you know, there's suicidal, homicidal. It's not we have a rehab piece, but it's not a drug and alcohol rehab they're going to go to for 7 days. Or for 30 days. It's 7 to 14 days, etc. But the amount of BS that people have to jump through, that this is covered. For example, if you're on meth or cocaine, we can't pay for detox. You need to come back sober. You know, we can't keep you if you don't have a mental health primary. You know, discharging people because insurance is only covering 4 days when they need 14. You know, so it's just like,
it's infuriating.
It is. It's just so. For now, if you're dealing with a client that's got a nice insurance or a big enough checkbook that it doesn't necessarily matter, but, you know, let them send their kid or their husband to rehab 3 times and it's $100,000 and then now it matters. But is there anything that you see that comes up when it comes to the healthcare system and what we're recommending for treatment, or what's being touted from the front of the room or the TV that you feel is hindering our ability to help? Is there anything that pops out to you with regards to that?
Well, I definitely love that you mentioned the detox piece, because I think for sure this has been something that is so infuriating to me with the opioid crisis, because, you know, I'll do an intervention and take somebody to detox from opiates and they get sent home because they detox on an outpatient basis. Right. And what heroin addict do you know with a needle in their arm that is going to be able to go home and just stop?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's frustrating that I don't know who makes these rules, but it's clearly not a person that has any front lines of addiction kind of experience, right? Because you would know. I understand there's no medical necessity. Like, heroin withdrawal is not dangerous. It's not going to cost you your life, nor is meth or cocaine, and that's why they're not covered. That's why they send you home. Alcohol and benzos are the only ones really life-threatening, so of course they'll typically let you stay for those. But even with alcohol, sometimes they send you home. Yeah. So it's sad to me that even with insurance, people can't get help. Those are people. Detox should be a standard protocol, regardless of medical necessity. And where does the mental health piece fall into this, right? We go through all this stuff with parity, and, they're supposed to be treated the same as any other illness, but why aren't they covering an opiate addict to detox based on the mental health part and what they're going to go through and that mental anguish? Okay. And what about even the physical pain? Like, it's not going to kill you, but opiate withdrawal is the most painful withdrawal on the planet. You're not going to die, but you're probably going to wish you did.
Yeah. And the other argument too is anybody that's using to that extent has got to have some mental health stuff going on. I mean, they got to want to be numbing something. They got to want to kill themselves in some way, shape, or form, or getting off of it. They're going to have it. And that's part of my argument, too, on why I feel like these conversations are important, is because the change happens with hand-to-hand combat conversations with moms and dads and people. So they know when it comes voting day and they see thing on the docket that says, do you want to give more money to, what we call it the Adam H board here in Ohio, but that's what that means. We need to up those budgets. We need to stop giving insurance companies so much power to go. Since in mental health and addiction, the answer often comes out as, well, it depends. In other words, you take someone there and they go, what's the treatment? They go, well, it depends. They're playing that. And they have the ability to play that. They can't play it with the heart because that's been established, the continuum of care for the heart, all this kind of stuff. And so they're playing on that. And as a pro-business person, I guess as they should, if they don't have to pay for something, they shouldn't have to. But I feel like that until people really understand and have the experience of taking their mom, daughter, wife, whatever, and get sent home when there's something going on, or the doctor says you need 14 days of treatment, they send them home after 5 days, you're not going to go blast on Facebook that how terrible it was and how mistreated and how shady the insurance companies are. You're just going to eat it. And that's how not talking about this is perpetuating the issue. Anytime someone gets on it's the insurance companies, it's thems, it's theys, and whatever, like, we can't do anything about that. But what we can do is, like, just moving the conversation forward. And it is, it is crazy how hard it is to get someone help when they really want help, and how everybody's just going, how are we not letting them in, and why are you sending them home unless they got a checkbook?
Now, on the flip side of that, I want to say also, I am really big on personal responsibility. And I also think that we as addicted people have some responsibility in this, that it's been perpetuated, relapse is a part of recovery, but you know what? It doesn't have to be.
100%.
Relapse does not have to be a part of recovery. And I think addicted people have to take some responsibility too, in that sometimes I feel like we need to try a little harder. It's, for some people, treatment is so readily available, like they don't even care if they relapse. They're like,
True.
oh, I'll just go back to treatment. And I've seen this even in my sober living houses. Oh, I'll just go back to detox for a few days. I'll just go back. And it's like, you know what? That's the kind of stuff that's also ruining the system.
100%.
Like, if you say you're going to quit, if you say you're going to get sober, then at that point, we need to get up off our buns and we need to make a real commitment, and we need to do the things necessary to stay sober. You don't commit until it's uncomfortable, or commit until it's inconvenient and you'd rather go home and put pajamas on so you don't want to go to a meeting, right? Like, we're being really lazy as a whole.
Yeah.
And for relapse, it's like there's a lot of choice in relapse, right? There's a million choices you have to make before a drink ever hits your lips or before a drug ever goes in your body, right? You've got to decide to do it. You got to think about it and probably wrestle with yourself about, am I going to, should I, shouldn't I, maybe I should, nobody will know. You've got to wrestle with it, make the decision you're going to do it. Then you have to orchestrate how you're going to do it and what that's going to look like, and creating the privacy or hiding it or whatever your situation may be. Then you have to go get it, right? Like, all of these are choices. And at every step of that, you can make a different choice. You can call somebody and go, oh my God, I'm really thinking about using. I need help. Hey, what are you doing? Can we go to a meeting? Hey, what are you up to? Can we go have coffee? I'm having a hard day. Or
Yeah.
I'm in a spot. I could really use some company. Like, it's a choice. Once alcohol and drugs are in your body, a whole different process takes over. But we have to be responsible for our own behavior and our own decisions. And addicted people historically have not been great at that.
Yeah, I agree, and that is a extremely valid point, and that's also assuming that they've had a couple of attempts trying to get clean, etc. The other thing that was brought to my attention, which I was totally oblivious of, was the mental health piece, because I only thought drug and alcohol, and we had an experience recently where, or at the beginning of last year, where my wife's been in Al-Anon for 10 years. She's been a life coach for 8 years. She had an acupuncturist she saw diligently. She had her own coach. She had a sponsor. All this stuff. My father-in-law's been sober for 6, maybe 7 years. He's almost 80. So it's all around us. We moved to Columbus. She ends up suicidal in a mental health hospital. Now, at least with the drug and alcohol piece, it's kind of, we can kind of joke about it. There's an air of like, there's a bit of sachet with like, we were bad and we used to do this way, and now we're this way. Wasn't that stupid? Weren't we crazy? But then you have the mental health piece of like someone that's, who wants to say I struggle with depression, anxiety, or I'm suicidal, and from the outside everything looks like they got it all. Like, why are you even complaining about it? So I think that's another kind of ripple on, this mental health and addiction part of the healthcare system, that, we don't really know. They don't really have a clear way to navigate it. And part of it's because it's so individualized, and it's very gray, and it's just a challenging conversation. But I think you bring a good point.
It's challenging. It's challenging all the way around. And I think the other big part of the whole thing is understanding that recovery is a journey, right? This is not you're going to treatment for 30 days and living happily ever after.
Sure.
It is a journey. And I understand that sometimes we drink again or we use drugs again in that process of really figuring out how powerful it is and how little control we have, right? Like, I understand it's user error. There's a learning curve. I totally get all of that. I think that we have to look at it as a long-term process. There's no quick fix. It's not one and done. And at the same time, we have to understand that a lot of this it's an inside job. This is work that we have to do inside ourselves, and it's not fast, and we have to be committed to it, and we have to do it for a long time to see some results,
So that being said, here's an area that I feel like is very important to talk about. Where can our 12-step peeps, regardless of the fellowship, do better? In other words, let's say the healthcare system does exactly what I advocate for. Someone comes in and says, I'm ready to detox. We go, no problem. Here's detox. You want to do a treatment? No problem. Here's 30 days. You want to do outpatient? No problem. Here it goes. And they're in there for some sort of opiate or whatever. They're talking to a psychiatrist. They're getting on medication. The therapist or the psychiatrist is recommending either Vivitrol or Suboxone or something like that, right? They're taking it as prescribed. They're doing everything that they have been asked to do, all paid. And then they send them to 12-step, and what do we tell them? And by we, some, but what happens? Right? How?
Because they're taking medication
or replacement therapy, etc. And then they get there and they're like, yo, you're not clean, which it brings up another topic. But anyway, where can we as people that are involved in 12 steps, and more importantly, people with more experience, or more experienced members with longer term sobriety, how can we do better from the 12-step side. When these people come from hospitals, from institutions, that all they're doing is following what their psychiatrist, what their therapists are recommending, and they get to us and we try to contradict everything that they've been told by the professionals.
Well, I think there's a couple of things we have to keep in mind. Firstly, the education, like for real, legitimate education and knowledge about addiction and mental health is going to be very limited in the rooms of 12 steps. Yeah. So I think that we all have to have an understanding that there are going to be things beyond the realm of 12 step, and which really is why in 12 steps we say we don't give advice, And I think the other big thing to remember is these are merely suggestions. Right? A lot of times, certainly people that have been sober a long, long time, they like to act like these suggestions are rules. And if you don't follow them to the T, you're doing it wrong. And it can be judgmental and condescending and not accepting and not inclusive. And I think that's a problem. It is not. It's just like I tell people that argue with me, or not argue with me, but argue against going to AA. It's like you're already judging the people in the room. This is not the place for you to go judge what other people are doing. Like, right. Yes, somebody is going to say God because they believe in God. It's none of your damn business. Like, why do you care? Right. It's none of your business. Leave people alone. We are all allowed to find our own journey, right? And listen, I did a lot of things against the grain. I had a male sponsor. I was a bartender well into my sobriety. 7 years in my sobriety, I was bartending. So I get that it can be difficult. And I got a fair amount of flack for the decisions that I made. And I had some women in my home group that still to this day do not like me because I had a male sponsor. For me, I just didn't care. I knew I had to do it the way it worked for me. I knew that my program was about my program and it was about my sobriety, and you're welcome to have your opinion. And the truth is, I'm not even that interested in my own opinion. More or less somebody else's. Sure. You know what I mean? So if you don't like how I'm doing things, that's cool. I'm not going to get upset about it. I'm not going to stop going. So I think we have to remember that they're opinions, not facts. And these are suggestions. It doesn't mean everybody has to follow it perfectly to a T. And if somebody is on medication because they have some severe trauma or clinical depression, which, by the way, is a real thing, it's not like people are making it up, like these are real, legitimate things to battle. And if they need to take medication for those things, it's just none of your damn business.
Yeah. And I think that's a little bit easier of a hurdle with the psychotropics or depression medication. Probably the biggest area which I see that take it on the chin the most is with Suboxone and Vivitrol and these other therapies. And I've I've moved a lot, but I think what I always come back to when I'm trying to impress upon the people I have influence over in the rooms as a more experienced member that we have to fan the flame of desire. I don't care what gets them in there. That if I'm running them off or I'm contradicting what they're saying, because being in the field right now, particularly mental health, for the first time ever, I have had, wouldn't say all, but on a consistent basis where therapists go, I don't even like sending my people to 12-step because you contradict everything I'm saying. Right. The research-based treatment says this. It's so they're going off of that. I always go, well, who's paying for the research? But that's beside the point. But they're going, I'm not going to send my people there because you contradict us. Yeah. And I'm going, well, I wouldn't want to send them either.
I'm not going to say that Suboxone isn't problematic because it is. Sure. I have high hopes for the new injection, Sublocade. I have high hopes for that. See how that goes. The problem with Suboxone is it is still abusable.
100%.
You can still misuse it, and it is not being used the way it was intended, right? So, and it's so tricky because I understand where treatment centers are coming from, right? Several years ago, we had this outbreak of people getting out of treatment within 30 days, relapsing and dying, right? And it was happening all over the place. There was a little period of time that it was really prominent and it was scary. So treatment centers want to rush in and give everybody Suboxone so they don't die. I get that. I don't want them to die either. At the same time, Suboxone is not a magic pill. Oh, it's not a pill at all, but you know what I mean? It's not, it's not a magic fix. Suboxone treats symptoms. And this is where I say again, we will have a tendency as addicted people to get very lazy, and we won't continue doing that inside work that we have to do to feel better because I can take Suboxone and it makes me feel better. So they won't continue doing the work that actually matters. Like, you have to learn to cope with your feelings. You have to learn to cope with your life, and all that stuff takes practice. And people will start taking Suboxone and then they ignore all of that work because now the symptoms are fixed.
Yeah. And I definitely don't think that that's exclusive to people taking Suboxone, and I don't think that's what you're saying at all. I just want to try and drive home the message to our people of the 12 steps to not forget where the hell our members are sent from. They are sent from jail. They are sent from probation, they are sent from hospitals, and they are sent from therapists. And if we want to have an impact with something that has changed our life, the number one thing we can do is fan the flame, take them through, let them have their hard knocks. And I'm not saying you need to have people in the rooms nodding out and abusing it. And I feel like probably you and I could articulate ourselves much better in that area outside of the room, outside, not during a meeting, than what the dude with a 9 months or a year could do. But sure. I just think it's important that we, like one of the one lady had said, we don't ever grab a sponsee and go, when are you going to get off your Zoloft, or when are you going to get off your psych meds, or we don't say that from the room. Well, you're like, well, yeah, we don't. So why are we?
Well, they used to.
They used to, yeah. Why are we blasting these people from the floor and making them feel so uncomfortable they don't want to come back? That's not how we get people help that they need. Well, that's
certainly not the attraction we're supposed to be doing.
That's not. And I also equally
scaring people out of the room is not very attractive.
That's right. Well, hey, let's wrap this thing up. One last question: who are some of the people that you like, that you follow, whether it's on Instagram, podcasts, resources, books, people that you get a lot from personally, or that you find that a lot of your clients like, just for those people listening that may be looking for some additional resources after we get off here, recovery related or not?
Okay. Well, I'm a lot entrepreneurship and personal development, so I'm always reading things. I just started reading again the new Codependence, Melanie Beattie, right? That she did Codependent No More, and I just started rereading that one. I'm always reading things about, I read Vivid Vision a few weeks ago. I read a lot. Well, I listen to audiobooks, and I do that a lot. I'm a huge Joe Rogan, Gary Vaynerchuk, Jocko Willink I love.
He's a little much for me. He's kind of
he is a little much.
But he is masculine man.
His leadership philosophies are second to none, though. They really are. Well, especially for somebody like me, because I'm all about personal responsibility too. And that's his belief system in leadership and entrepreneurship is, if something goes wrong in my sober living house, regardless if a house leader made a mistake or not, it all comes down to me. It's my fault one way or another. I dropped the ball somewhere, know? So I love that.
Which Gary talks quite a bit about as well. All those peeps do. Who else? Anybody else come to mind?
I'll tell you, for addiction, the number one book I hear the most about, and I read it a few years ago, is This Naked Mind. Everybody loves This Naked Mind. It's fascinating about alcohol just being a poison, and it's really, really good. That one comes up a lot. I really like, there's a book, Miracle Morning, about morning routines.
I haven't heard any of these.
I mean, I probably listen to 4 or 5 books a week. So
have you heard of?
I could wear you out on book lists.
Have you heard of Byron Katie?
does he have an YouTube channel? Oh,
it's a lady, and her name, it has blown me away. It's very the book that I read recently was Loving What Is. And she's got the premise is 4 questions and a turnaround, which is basically working the 12 steps in a in a couple of questions. And the premise is it's not our thoughts that are the problem; it's what we believe about our thoughts. In other words, believing that the thought is true. And so she has like a couple. Is it true? Can you know what the 100% certainty is true? How do you feel when you believe it's true? Who would you be if you didn't believe that it was true? And then the turnaround is, let's look in the mirror basically and go, if I said my wife is trying to control me, it's how am I trying to control her? How am I trying to manipulate her and me? And so it's just it is a absolute phenomenal book, and she's got tons of videos on YouTube. It's this really soft-spoken white lady, white hair, that you've seen them at conventions and conferences. They seem to just kind of hover and nothing messes with them,
Yeah.
It's that type of lady. But Byron Katie, she goes by Katie. She's been on Oprah, all kind of stuff. But if you got a book list, that is one I would 100% recommend.
I'm also really big on law of attraction, so I read a lot of stuff about visualization and law of attraction stuff. That's kind of what I base my life on. So I love all those things too. Lewis Howes, there's so many that are so good.
Those are great. I hope to. I just want to give some of the listeners some things that you like, and then while we wrap up, why don't you plug where they can find you, all your businesses, your podcast, your Insta, all the fun stuff, so we can. I'll put it at the end in the notes for you.
Sure. The best place to find me, Instagram is probably my favorite, at Addiction Unlimited. We also have a fantastic Facebook group. It's totally private. Nobody can see you're in there except the other members in there. And it's just an incredible support, motivation, inspiration place. We share everything in there from good to bad. And that's also Addiction Unlimited on Facebook. And probably my best website is My Recovery Toolbox, www.myrecoverytoolbox.com. It's full of recovery resources. There's a ton of free stuff on there, as well as some paid stuff. I have an online course and all those things. But there's a ton of free stuff on there too. Podcast episodes, blogs, some different, I have a mindset makeover series on there that's free. So I try to really build out a pretty robust library of free things too, especially thinking like when you're in the middle of the night, when it's midnight or 2 a.m. and you're struggling with something and it's not easy to call somebody, having those free resources is really, really big. And having a Facebook group is really big in those moments.
That's awesome. Well, I will say I participate in a couple Facebook groups, and Addiction Unlimited is one of the good ones. So you're doing a great job over there.
Thank you.
Thank you good. Thank you for your service. And thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you. It was great to meet you computer screen to computer screen. And I love the podcast. Thanks for your service.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Talk to you later.